hello, here we are. We're going to get going with 2 Samuel 16. Now, if we remember, let's recap this, okay? David did something really terrible for Bathsheba, whom he lusted after, got pregnant, and had her husband sent to the front lines and killed. Because he couldn't get the husband to go make love to the wife. He brought him off the battlefield and he still wouldn't go home and make love to his wife, and David was hoping that would hide the pregnancy. And when that didn't happen, David sent him to the front lines and had him get killed in the fighting. So the Lord was displeased, and the Lord told him, he said, I gave you everything. And he said, you're going to get punished for this. And he took his son from him, the son that Bathsheba bore, died. Okay, so David was very upset. But in the prophecy of the son dying, which the prophet Nathan gave to David, he said, you know what? You're gonna lose a lot. Your women are going to be in the arms of your enemy in broad daylight. What you did was in darkness, but this is going to happen in broad daylight. So fast forward, we now see that David's own son has won the hearts of the people through manipulation and is now capturing Jerusalem. And his father has had to take all of his faithful servants and flee. But he's left 10 of his concubines there, and you can be sure that those concubines will become his son's wives in broad daylight. Okay, so David is really reaping, not only losing his son with Bathsheba, but now it's just going on and on. In other words, the repercussions of sin, guys, can go on for a while until it's all played out. Okay, so we need to think before we act. If we're going to do something sneaky, I would say let's think better of it, okay? Because this is really going on. Now, God did give Bathsheba and David another son, which was Solomon. But, you know, once again, the prophecy that was spoken to him, to King David by Nathan, is being played out here. So let's see what happens. It's not... Well, I don't want to ruin it for you. So here we go. 2 Samuel 16. This is when David and his men have fled the city of Jerusalem. When David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, there was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth, waiting to meet him. He had a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisins, 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. The king asked Ziba, why have you brought these? Ziba answered, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who become exhausted in the wilderness. The king then asked, where is your master's grandson? Meaning, where is Saul's grandson Mephibosheth? Because Ziba was the one who had 15 or 20 family members that were all servants to Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth is Saul's grandson. Ziba said to him, he's staying in Jerusalem, Mephibosheth, who's also lame in his feet, by the way, from an accident when he was a child, because he thinks today the Israelites will restore me to my grandfather's kingdom. So here's Mephibosheth thinking, oh, goody, I'm going to get restored to be the new king. Okay, so everybody's got an idea that they're going to capture this Jerusalem and be the king. So then the king said to Ziba, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours. So Mephibosheth just lost everything. I humbly bow, Ziba said. May I find favor in your eyes, my lord the king. As King David approached to Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was Shemel, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops and the special guard were on David's right and left. As he cursed, Shimei said, get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. So now all the haters are coming out of the woodworks because they see David is getting run out of town, okay? The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you've reigned. The Lord has given the kingdom into the hands of your son Absalom. You've come to ruin because you're a murderer. So clearly there were still some Saul supporters in David's reign, okay? This guy's probably quite old. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head." But the king said, "What does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he's cursing because the Lord said to him, 'Curse David,' who can ask, 'Why do you do this?'" David then said to Abishai and all his officials, "My son, my own flesh and blood, is trying to kill me. How much more then this Benjamite? My own son's trying to kill me, so how much more these people that aren't even my flesh and blood hating me? Leave him alone, let him curse, for the Lord's told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore to me his covenant blessing instead of his curse today." So David and his men continued along the road while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. The king and all the people with him arrived at their destination exhausted, and there he refreshed himself. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. Then Hushai, the Archite, David's confidant, went to Absalom and said to him, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Absalom said to Hushai, "So this is the love you show your friend? If he's your friend, why didn't you go with him?" Hushai said to Absalom, "No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people, and by all the men of Israel, his I will be, and I will remain with him. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve the son, just as I served your father? So I will serve you." Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give us your advice. What should we do?" Now remember, Ahithophel is the one that David prayed that his advice would come out as just gibberish foolishness, okay? Ahithophel answered, "Sleep with your father's concubines, whom he's left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you've made yourself obnoxious to your father, and the hands of everyone with you will be more resolute." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel, which was the prophecy. I'm going to put your wives in the arms of another, and he's going to sleep with them in broad daylight. That was the prophecy Nathan gave David for his sin with Bathsheba. Now, in those days, the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. So he was respected at one point. 2 Samuel chapter 17. Ahithophel said to Absalom, "I'd choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I'd attack him while he's weary and weak. I'd strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. All the people will be unharmed." This plan seemed good to Absalom and to the elders of Israel. But Absalom said, "Summon also Hushai the Archite, so we can hear what he has to say as well." When Hushai came to him, Absalom said, "Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? If not, give us your opinion." Hushai replied to Absalom, "The advice Ahithophel has given is not good this time. You know your father and his men, they're fighters and as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Besides, your father is an experienced fighter. He won't spend the night with the troops. Even now he's hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, whoever hears about it will say there's been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. Then even the bravest soldier whose heart's like the heart of a lion will melt with fear, for all Israel knows that your father's a fighter and that those with him are brave. So I advise you, let all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, be gathered to you, with you yourself leading them into battle. Then we will attack him wherever he may be found, and will fall on him as dew settles on the ground. Neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city and will drag it down to the valley until not so much as a pebble is left. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel, for the Lord is determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar the priests, Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such, but I've advised them to do so and so. Now send a message at once and tell David, don't spend the night at the fords in the wilderness, cross over without fail, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En Rogel. A female servant was to go and inform them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So the two of them left at once and went to the house of a man in Bahurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. His wife took a covering and spread it out over the opening of the well and scattered grain over it. No one knew anything about it. When Absalom's men came to the woman at the house, they asked, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The woman answered, they crossed over the brook. The men searched but found no one, so they returned to Jerusalem. After they'd gone, the two climbed out of the well and went to inform King David. They said to him, set out and cross the river at once. Ahithophel has advised such and such against you. So David and all the people with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, no one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and set out for his house in his hometown. He put his house in order and then hanged himself. I'm going to read that again. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey, set out for his house in his hometown. He put his house in order and then hanged himself. So he died and was buried in his father's tomb. Ew. David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of Jether, an Ishmaelite who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash and sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. So he's really got this all sewn up. He's grabbing everyone he can and turning them to his side. Joab was David's military leader, but instead he put Amasa over the military. And Amasa was the son of Jether, who had married Israel, the daughter of Nahash and sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. So he's kind of shutting doors everywhere. I don't know how to explain it, but you get it. The Israelites and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobai, son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Makir, son of Amiel from Lo-debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley, flour and roasted grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from cow's milk for David and his people to eat. For they said, the people have become exhausted and hungry and thirsty in the wilderness. 2 Samuel chapter 18. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David sent out his troops, a third under the command of Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. The king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. But the men said, you must not go out. If we're forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care, but you're worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. The king answered, I'll do whatever seems best to you. So the king stood beside the gate while all his men marched out in units of hundreds and of thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. He's saying, it's my kid, no matter what, even though he's trying to kill me and he's my own son. Be gentle with him for my sake. And that brings something up for me. I can remember when a child hates you or goes after you, they really, really do it. And my daughter did it to me. And I have more to share on this topic later after we hear the end of this story. But I will say that there have been times in my life where I have been afraid of not afraid of my daughter, but I have known that she most likely could have wanted to kill me because I had her daughter and was raising her daughter, and she was just very jealous. And I told her once that I was afraid that she would plot to kill me because it was just the feeling of hatred, the vibe was so intense. And I remember her crying kind of fakely about it. But you have to understand what I knew about her and what I saw coming from her led me to think that that was a distinct possibility that she could harm me or plot to harm me. And I know she tried to pretend that she was insulted, but I kind of saw through it. What I'm saying is, it is possible for a child to hate the parent and go after them. As crazy as this seems, that Absalom, of course, there's a kingdom at stake. I suppose with between women, there was my daughter and I. There was a child at stake. I guess that's a woman's kingdom, children. But it is possible that children can become this hateful towards their parent for whatever reason. And we know the reason with my daughter is that she hates my Christianity with a passion. And she wanted to get her daughter away from me. And she told the judge over and over, and nobody could understand it, I don't want her to ever see Autumn again. And it was like, whoa, nobody understood why she kept saying that. Now, she seems to have accomplished it by brainwashing my granddaughter against me, but I know my daughter well enough to know that what she truly did not want was she did not want her daughter to become a Christian like me, and she was already a Christian when she was with me. She's backslidden now, so let's see what happens. My granddaughter I'm speaking of. But the idea of having two Christians in the family was too much for Gabrielle, my daughter, and she was bound and determined to take that child out from under any Christian influence. And it happened. For now, it's working. And it's very painful when your children do things like that to you. I can attest to that, but I am healing, and that's what's so exciting, is I'm starting to heal and I'm starting to stand up again. And once I'm fully erect and standing, I'm not going to easily open the door to somebody who is there to destroy me, whether it's my daughter or my granddaughter. That door isn't opening again. I mean, only the Lord can make something right out of it, because otherwise I'm leaving this world without ever seeing them again because of how they treated me, because of my Christianity, because that's what it boiled down to. No matter what anybody would think or say or what they would want to say, it boiled down to my Christianity, to Jesus, that they hated Jesus. Ultimately, my granddaughter, I don't know, she was very brainwashed. But, I will never look back at those two people again. It's sad, but it's sad for them. It's no longer sad for me. I mean, I still cry once in a while, but I'm healing, and that's a good thing. So let's continue this story and let's see what happens with these players, okay? And you're going to see the retribution from the Lord is going to come crashing in on this whole story, okay? Because God was committed to David. You have to remember that. God is committed to you, okay? He's committed to me. All right. If you're serving him, he's committed to you, and no insurrection or rebellion or this kind of stuff is going to get too far. Okay. All right. So he says to the leaders of his armies, Ittai, Abishai, and Joab, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There, Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. Now, Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair, remember his hair was so heavy it weighed, I don't know what, 2 shekels or something real heavy when he cut it off every year. So when the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept on going. What a misfortune. How unfortunate, right? When one of the men saw what had happened, he told Joab, "I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree." Joab said to the man who had told him this, "What? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have had to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt." But the man replied, "Even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I wouldn't lay a hand on the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I'd put my life in jeopardy and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me." In other words, if I did that, you would have turned on me and said, "Oh, he did it," or whatever. You wouldn't have wanted to be associated with me. Joab said, "I'm not going to wait like this for you." So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And that's what happens to children that hate their parents. I mean, the 5th commandment is honor your mother and your father so that you will have long life. Okay, you just don't do stuff like that to your parents. You just don't. I mean, my parents were nutty in their ways. My father was an alcoholic. My mother had mental problems. But I never hit my mother. I never did to my mother what Gabby did to me. I never dragged my mother into court for any reason. I just grew up where you just didn't do that to your parents. And I knew girls in high school that hit their mothers and all kinds of weird stuff, and I was like horrified by it. I mean, I would never consider doing anything like that. So I don't get people like that. But in this day and age, can't trust any of these kids as far as you can throw them. I mean, if you've got a good kid, God bless you. But I mean, the very fact that I have a granddaughter that doesn't acknowledge me when I raised her is very weird to me. It's just psycho. I just think about it and I'm like, wow, what did I do that was so horrible? My parents certainly did worse things to me and I just adored them anyway. I loved them. But there's just no love at all coming from the two girls that I raised. It's very sad, but my thought is, and this is what comforts me, is it's because I'm such a Christian person that I serve the Lord, and that's what's making them hate. Now, if I didn't serve the Lord and this was happening, it would be even more of a conundrum. But the fact that I serve the Lord as best as I can every day of my life, all day, all night, then that's, to me, that's the comfort. That's the reason this is happening. This is what happens to saints, and we can't quail away from it or be scared of trials like this. We have to dive right in and keep walking, right? Okay. All right. So Joab said, I'm not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him into a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the King's Valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, I have no son to carry on the memory of my name. He named the pillar after himself, and it's called Absalom's monument to this day. Now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has vindicated him by delivering him from the hand of his enemies. You are not the one to take the news today, Joab told him. You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today because the king's son is dead. Then Joab said to a Cushite, go tell the king what you have seen. The Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite. But Joab replied, my son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that will bring you a reward. He said, come what may, I want to run. So Joab said, run. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. While David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up to the roof of the gateway by the wall. As he looked out, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out to the king and reported it. The king said, if he's alone, he must have good news. And the runner came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another runner, and he called down to the gatekeeper, look, another man running alone. The king said, he must be bringing good news too. The watchman said, it seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. He's a good man, the king said. He comes with good news. Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, all is well. He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, praise be to the Lord your God. He's delivered up those who lifted their hands against my lord the king. The king asked, is the young man Absalom safe? Ahimaaz answered, I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was. The king said, stand aside and wait here. So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, my lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all who rose up against you. The king asked the Cushite, is the young man Absalom safe? The Cushite replied, may the enemies of the Lord, of my lord the king, and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. If only I died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. That just shows you how much as parents, we love our children, no matter how cruel they are to us. We always have that place in our heart. You know, I mean, Gabrielle was my little baby, you know. All right, so we're going to do one more, and then that's going to be the end for tonight. 2 Samuel chapter 19. Joab was told, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom, and for the whole army the victory that day was turned into mourning, because on that day the troops heard it said, the king is grieving for his son. The men stole into the city that day as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. So they couldn't even hold their heads up. The king covered his face and cried aloud, oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son. Then Joab went into the house to the king and said, today you've humiliated your men who have just saved your life, and the lives of your sons and daughters, and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You've made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you'd be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come upon you from your youth till now. So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway. When the men were told the king is sitting in the gateway, they all came before him. Meanwhile, the Israelites had fled to their homes. Throughout the tribes of Israel, all the people were arguing among themselves, saying, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies. He's the one who rescued us from the hand of the Philistines. But now he's fled the country to escape Absalom. And Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, has died in battle. So why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Ask the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace, since what is being said throughout Israel has reached the king at his quarters? You are my relatives, my own flesh and blood, so why should you be the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you're not the commander of my army for life in place of Joab. So he's taking Amasa, who was somehow related to Joab, who was made by Absalom's military leader, and David's taking him and saying, you're now my leader. Joab is no more. I guess he didn't like Joab yelling at him. He won over the hearts of the men of Judah so that they were all of one mind. They sent word to the king, return, you and all your men. Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan. Now the men of Judah had come to Gilgal to go out and meet the king and bring him across the Jordan. Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. With him there were 1,000 Benjamites, along with Ziba, the steward of Saul's household, and his 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed to the Jordan where the king was. They crossed at the ford to take the king's household over and to do whatever he wished. When Shimei, son of Gera, crossed the Jordan, he fell prostrate before the king. This is the guy that was yelling at him and throwing dirt at him, and said to him, may my lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind, for I, your servant, know that I have sinned. But today I've come here as the first from the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my lord the king. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said, shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? He cursed the Lord's anointed. David replied, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? What right do you have to interfere? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I'm king over Israel? So the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king promised him on oath. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. Now remember, he thought he was going to be exalted as the king and represent Saul's line. He had not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth? He said, my lord the king, since I, your servant, am lame, I said, I'll have my donkey saddled and will ride on it so I can go with the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me. And he slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish. All my grandfather's descendants deserved nothing but death from my lord the king. But you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king? So he's saying that Ziba lied about him wanting to become king in place of David over Israel, okay? The king said to him, why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land. So first he gave it all to Ziba because Mephibosheth betrayed him. Now he's saying, you can have half back. Mephibosheth said to the king, let him take everything now that my lord the king has returned home safely. Barzillai the Gileadite also came down from Rogelim to cross the Jordan with the king and to send him on his way from there. Now Barzillai was very old, 80 years of age. He had provided for the king during his stay in Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, cross over with me and stay with me in Jerusalem, and I will provide for you. But Barzillai answered the king, how many more years will I live that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I'm now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between what's enjoyable and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still hear the voices of male and female singers? So he's saying I'm deaf. I can't taste anything anymore. Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will cross over the Jordan with the king for a short distance. But why should the king reward me in this way? Let your servant return that I may die in my own town near the tomb of my father and mother. But here's your servant Kimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king. Do for him whatever you wish. The king said, Kimham will cross over with me, and I'll do for him whatever you wish, and anything you desire from me, I'll do for you. So all the people crossed the Jordan, and then the king crossed over. The king kissed Barzillai and bid him farewell, and Barzillai returned to his home. When the king crossed over to Gilgal, Kimham crossed with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel had taken the king over. Soon all the men of Israel were coming to the king and saying to him, Why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal the king away and bring him and his household across the Jordan together with all his men? Wow, that's tricky, isn't it? Ooh, Judah took you up. Why'd you go? All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, we did this because the king is closely related to us. Why are you angry about it? Have we eaten any of the king's provisions? Have we taken anything for ourselves? So maybe these are Israelites that are on David's side and they're feeling left out. I don't know. Then the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, we have 10 shares in the king, so we have a greater claim on David than you have. Why then do you, meaning 10 tribes versus the 2 that are Judah? Why then do you treat us with contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing back our king? But the men of Judah pressed their claims even more forcefully than the men of Israel. Okay, I love you very much. Don't forget to talk to God. I'm telling you to pray. Honestly, start a dialogue, okay? He's waiting. I love you, and I'll see you tomorrow, and we'll pick it up at looks like chapter 20 of 2 Samuel. God bless you. I'll talk to you then. Good night.